السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقال الملك ائتوني به، فلما جاءه الرسول قال ارجع إلى ربك فاسأله ما بال النسوة اللاتي قطعن أيديهن إن ربي بكيدهن عليم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. So just as a recap, very quickly inshallah, we were discussing last week the dream that Yusuf or the dream the two prisoners had seen, and Yusuf interpreted their dreams. And then after that, Yusuf told him to inform him, the one that was going to be saved, that when you go back to the king, inform him of my situation, so he can look into the matter, because we know Yusuf was innocent. But shaitan either made Yusuf forget to say Allah, to look to Allah first, or that person forgot to mention it as shaitan made him forget. A little bit later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the king see a dream, and we interpreted that dream: 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, devouring the 7 fat cows, and going forward. So that person, he remembered Yusuf and he went to Yusuf and he said, interpretate this dream for me, ayyuha siddiq, because he knew Yusuf's truthfulness and honor, that Yusuf would tell him the dream. So he went to Yusuf and Yusuf interpreted the dream, and he gave him more than whatever was mentioned in the dream. At this point, now this person has come back and he's talking to the king, and he's telling the king of the dream and its interpretation. So you can imagine how the king is feeling, that he listens to this interpretation of the dream, and he's quite impressed by this interpretation. So he wants to meet this man. Who is this man that's in prison that can interpret the dream, and it seems such a valid interpretation? My people here who are supposed to be so much more intelligent, and they can't even interpret it. They don't even make an effort to interpret it. So the king says to that person, go and call that man out of prison. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ. So the king says to this man, bring Yusuf or bring this man to me. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ قَالَ ارْجِعْ إِلَى رَبِّكَ. When the king's messenger came, I want us to understand the situation. Here is an innocent man sitting in prison for many years, unjustly. And here someone comes to him and says, the king wants to meet you. He wants to take you out of prison. Don't worry about whatever happened. I don't care about your crime. I want to take you out of prison. And Yusuf says, Irji' ila rabbik. Go back to your master. Meaning, go back to the king and tell the king, I'm not going to come out like this. Rather, I want you to do something before I come out. Go ask those women who cut their hands. Ask them their situation. Ask them what happened. He's telling him who to ask, because he wants them to ask those specific people to find out the issue or find out the reason why he was put into jail. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on one occasion, when referencing this ayah and reading it, he said, may Allah have mercy on Yusuf alayhi salam. He says, because if I was in Yusuf alayhi salam's place, and someone came to me to ask for a dream, an interpretation of a dream, and I was in prison, what happens oftentimes? I want a deal. I give you information, on condition you let me go. I give you information on condition amnesty. No punishment for me. But Yusuf a.s. was such an honorable human being that when this person came to him, without hesitation, he interpreted that dream. May Allah protect any of us from being in jail and having to be put in a situation where someone comes and seeks our help. Most of us can say at least this much has ever happened in our life. Where I have the capability of helping someone, the question then came, did I help without asking for something in return? Did I help after contemplating whether if this person is worthy of a favor, that if I do a favor for him, then I know he'll owe me? You think Yusuf a.s. interpreted that dream because he felt that now this person's going to owe me? No, that was his honor. That was his character. That he helped regardless of his situation. That's the lesson we're trying to derive from here. We need to be such people that when somebody asks us for help, we only help for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not for any return. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, if I was in Yusuf alayhi salam's situation, what I would have done is I would have made it a condition that if you want me to interpret it, you have to free me first. Whereas Yusuf alayhi salam didn't make a condition. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam goes on again. And he says, may Allah have raham on him. Had I been in his situation, and the messenger came to take me out of prison, I would have gone out of prison. I wouldn't have worried about my innocence at that point. Because at that point, once I get out, then I have the time, all I need to prove my innocence. But let me just get out. I don't want the king to change his mind. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, two things here. Number one, why is he saying this? Because he's highlighting the superior character of Yusuf alayhi salam. That's number one. Which is self-evident, we can understand why he's saying it. But then the question comes, would Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam really have done that? Would he have aided on condition that they freed him? Would he have said when the messenger came, would he have said, okay, let's take me out and then worry about his innocence? The scholars say, no. This is out of the tawadu and the humbleness and the humility of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He wanted to show the greatness of Yusuf alayhi salam, to show you another method, which I mentioned last week as well, to show you another way. It's just like when somebody says to someone, they do something, they go through some difficulty, or they worked really hard, they achieve something, right? And they say, wow, like if I was in your situation, I wouldn't have been able to do that. But it realistically isn't them saying they wouldn't have been able to do it, but they're trying to do what? To praise you. And praise how your effort. That's the point here. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was trying to highlight the character of Yusuf alayhi salam. So we know what happens. The king, he goes and he calls these women. And he asks them, tell me, مَا خَطْبُكُنَّ إِذْ رَاوَدتُّنَّ يُوسُفَ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. What was the situation when Yusuf alayhi salam, when he tried to seduce you all, and what happened? What was that situation? What was the situation in relation to you and Yusuf alayhi salam, and why he was thrown in jail? Meaning, he said he tried to seduce them or do something towards them. And the women all said in unison, قُلْنَا حَاشَ لِلَّهِ مَا عَلِمْنَا عَلَيْهِ مِنْ سُوءٍ. The reality is such that Yusuf alayhi salam did no wrong. We don't know any wrong that Yusuf alayhi salam did. And at that moment, Imra'atul Aziz was present. The one who initiated this whole plot. The one who trapped Yusuf alayhi salam, gave him a very hard choice, and he ended up being thrown in prison. She says, الآن أحصص الحق. Today, now, the truth has become clear. Why is she saying this? Because it was at the request of Yusuf alayhi salam this investigation be done. And she still had somewhat of a feeling for Yusuf alayhi salam. That now he's demanding this investigation. So much time has passed by. Now I need to speak the truth. حَصْحَصَ الْحَقِّ أَنَا رَاوَدتُّهُ عَنْ نَفْسِي. The truth is, I'm the one who tried to seduce him. I'm the one who tried to make him do something wrong. And then when he wouldn't do it, I had him thrown into prison. Again, I want to highlight some character of Yusuf alayhi salam. Notice something that Yusuf alayhi salam did. When he asked the king or the messenger to go to the king and find out and investigate what happened, notice something. He said, the women who cut their hands. What's so unique about that? He didn't mention Imra'atul Aziz. He didn't mention her. He didn't mention her by name. He just said all the women. When reality is what? If anyone is worthy of being accused of something, it would be her. But he never mentions her name. Scholars say that the reason Yusuf a.s. didn't do it, and he didn't want to mention her name, although she's included, but he didn't mention her by name, because her husband was very honorable to Yusuf a.s. He took care of him. What are we highlighting from here? When a person has been compassionate to you, has done ihsan on you, and they make a mistake, like your parents. Sometimes they make a mistake. They're not perfect beings, they're human beings. But they do so much khair to you, or a friend, or an uncle in the masjid, or a relative. You know what type of society we live in? As long as the moment you make one mistake against me, it's like as if I forget all the khair they ever did in their life. Really? What are we learning? Is this Islam? This is not Islam. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us. This is why Allah mentions the Anbiya alayhi salam story, to show you what is the best character you can be at. That despite the fact she put him in prison, and her husband ultimately did have a hand in it. Because when the whole situation was happening, and he was compelled by his cabinet people, or whoever was around him, and then his wife was kind of like putting pressure on him, and he's saying, look man, I really don't want to put you in prison, I know you're a great person, but if I don't do it, then people are going to, what are they going to say about, me as a person, and me and my family, and it's going to put a black dot on me, and it's going to make me look like a really bad person. And he was compelled, he felt compelled to do that to Yusuf alayhi salam. But despite that one error, Yusuf alayhi salam did not want to disrespect him. So he didn't mention his wife's name. He didn't mention her by name. And Allah knows best. So, at that point, when she sees that Yusuf alayhi salam wants to finally say, look, say the truth. She says, the truth is, I tried to seduce him. He didn't do anything wrong. Now the following two verses in Surah Yusuf that come immediately after this, since I said most of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, since it goes from the beginning to the end, it's really the tafsir of the surah. This ayah, ذَلِكَ لِيَعْلَمَ أَنِّي لَمْ أَخُنْهُ بِالْغَيْبِ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي كَيْدَ الْخَائِنِينَ, has two interpretations. The meaning is, either Zulaykha herself is saying, why am I now admitting the truth? I'm admitting the truth now because I want my husband to know I never betrayed him. Meaning, my actions were up to seduction. I did not go beyond that. Meaning, it's not that she didn't want to, but she never did. So she's trying to tell her husband that I never actually went and did something like zina. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation, ذَلِكَ لِيَعْلَمَ, it is Yusuf alayhi salam saying, why is it that I requested this investigation in the first place? Number one, when it comes to Yusuf alayhi salam, he's a prophet of Allah. So his name needs to be clear. Had he not sought an investigation, the king perhaps could have felt that I did a mercy on Yusuf alayhi salam. By how? By taking him out of prison. And Yusuf alayhi salam did not want that ihsan of the king, because he was innocent. Unless people look at him later on and say, well, the king just did a favor and took him out. Really he was a criminal, whatever, maybe he changed his ways, but he's still a bad actor. You never know, he might do it again. So it could be, well, that's why Yusuf alayhi salam wanted the investigation done, number one. Number two, it could be that Yusuf alayhi salam is saying here, the other reason as to why I wanted the investigation done is because I want him to know, meaning her husband, to him, not him, I never cheated. I never did something wrong with his wife. I kept to the end, I never did something wrong. I want him to know as well. And Allah knows best. Majority of the Mufassirin are of the opinion that this is the statement of Zulaykha. I also agree with that statement simply because it's continuing on her statement. Right after, before that, is talking about her statement, and then to change to Yusuf alayhi salam, and then go back to her. It seems more as if this is her statement. And she is saying, I'm admitting the truth now, because I wanted my husband to know I did not do anything wrong. The verse that comes following this, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Again, with the two interpretations. She is saying, and this is reality of every human being. Sometimes we try our best to be good people. But sometimes we make a mistake. We try our best to be the best humans we can, best Muslims we can, and sometimes we make a mistake. So she is saying, look, what I ended up doing, the temptation I ended up having, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. It's not, I'm not trying to say I'm innocent. But إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. The reality of the nafs is such that it incites towards evil. And really, if this was the time to discuss about the nafs and the different types of nafs, I would talk about it. But very quickly, in detail, very quickly, very briefly, you have the nafs that incites evil, which is called nafs al-ammara. Then you have the nafs that is called nafs al-lawama, that criticizes you when you do something wrong. Criticizes you when you do something wrong. And then you have nafs al-mutama'inna, that is the nafs that is only content when you do ibadah. So clearly, every one of us wants to have that nafs that is content when we do ibadah, meaning you're constantly bothered. I haven't prayed salah. Oh, it bothers me. I have to go pray salah. We all know the strength of that nafs. But the idea is for a Muslim to strengthen that nafs. And the idea here is, nafs al-ammara incites you to evil, nafs al-lawama criticizes you when you're wrong. When you do something wrong, meaning it's telling you to do good. But the reality is, if you give in to the nafs al-ammara, then it becomes stronger. And the nafs al-lawama becomes weaker. And then you're less likely to fight against that temptation. Okay? I have a lecture on it as well if somebody's interested, how to control your nafs. It talks about this in detail. But that's the point. So she is saying, yes, I did something wrong. I'm not trying to claim my innocence. But the thing is, sometimes the nafs is so powerful that it incites you towards evil, and I made a mistake. And that is Zulaykha's statement. Or it could be Yusuf alayhi salam saying the same statement. Because at the end it says, إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. And Yusuf alayhi salam is saying, my ability to refrain from falling into that trap was not from my own doing. It was not from my own doing. Because the nafs is such that it incites towards evil. And I would have been tempted to fall into it. However, it was the mercy of my Lord that gave me the strength to fight it. إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. This is the way of the righteous, where they don't put it on themselves that, oh, I didn't do this, or I'm a really righteous person, or I do this much ibadah, I wake up for tahajjud, because of their own actions. They always relate it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this was a little extra because it was part of the surah. So now, the truth has been made clear. The king has found out the truth. Remember, Yusuf alayhi salam is not there yet. Why? Because Yusuf alayhi salam was still in jail. So, the same verses repeat. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ. Except there's a difference this time. أَسْتَخْلِصْهُ لِنَفْسِهِ. The king says, go bring this man. He's so excited to meet him. What an honorable man who was unjustly thrown in prison. And of course, he didn't just ask one story and then moved on. He asked more about Yusuf alayhi salam. Who was he? What kind of character he has? Oh, he does this and he does that. And so now he's excited to meet such a great person. He says, take him out of prison. Go call him, bring him. أَسْتَخْلِصْهُ لِنَفْسِي. I want to make him from amongst those who are amongst my close ones. Amongst my close ones. فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَهُ. So now Yusuf alayhi salam, he leaves the prison. And he comes to the king. فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَهُ. After the king and they speak, it is said, what were they talking about? It is said that maybe they were talking about the dream. The king is again saying, this is what I saw. And maybe he gave him a little extra detail. I saw this and I saw that. And there's some narration that talk about this. and hadith that mention that the king and Yusuf alayhi salam were discussing the dream, maybe discussing what happened to Yusuf alayhi salam, and how Yusuf alayhi salam got there in the first place. Wallahu alam. After speaking to him, he said to him, إِنَّكَ الْيَوْمَ لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. And that is how Allah works. Today, you have a safe place with me. You have an honorable status with me. You have a maqam and a place with me. Where was Yusuf alayhi salam? A young boy, thrown into a well, taken out, made into a slave, was in servitude for so long, then was tested by Allah, then thrown in prison after being tested by Allah, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally takes him out. He takes this slave and makes him what? The treasurer. The one who's in charge of all the affairs. Not just the money, religious affairs, the schooling affairs. That is the maqam Allah gave him. Before we get to that, he says, today you have a place close to me, a place with a high rank. I trust you. So now Yusuf alayhi salam, knowing what's going to happen, and that is, they're going to have 7 years in which, and they go into detail about how Yusuf alayhi salam would have to go to different towns, and basically he would go to each town, tell them to take whatever they needed, whatever extra they would have, he would purchase it from the king, from the Baytul Mal, from the king's money, from the money of the government. He would then give them money and take their extra corn and whatever else that was there. Why? Because he knew that for 7 years, he had to develop such a system that for the next 7 years, we're going to have no vegetation, nothing is going to grow, and for the next 7 years, whatever I have gathered today has to suffice for everyone. Because this drought did not exist just in Egypt, but its outskirting areas as well. So you can only imagine how much Yusuf alayhi salam, how he had to deploy such a system that he would be able to be successful in this. So now, because he knows this reality, wherever in Qur'an, generally, you always find something. Even Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself says, don't ask for leadership. Don't ask for leadership. Because you never know that if you're given leadership, it might just slaughter. بِغَيْرِ سِكِّينَ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. You'd be like slaughter without a knife. Because, I always tell people, looking from the outside in, it may look nice to be in charge. But people who are in charge of things, they never get peace. You may not see it always on their face, but they're constantly worried. They could be outside the workplace, but they're constantly worried. You may work, you do your job and you leave. But the person who's in charge, his mind never sleeps. His thought is always worried about something. So, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam always taught us, you should ask for leadership. But in this scenario, we learned something. قَالَ جَعَلْنِي عَلَى خَزَائِنِ الْأَرْضِ. He said, make me in charge of the treasures of the land. Meaning, make me in charge of this responsibility. إِنِّي حَفِيظٌ عَلِيمٌ. I am one who can deal with it. Hafiz, I can take care of its matter. I can take care of it. Meaning I can develop a system where I can go around collecting enough things that I am pretty confident that I will be able to keep them for 7 years they had to be in such a way, they didn't spoil. You understand how big of a plan Yusuf a.s. had to make, that they wouldn't spoil for 7 years. So he says, Inni Hafiz, I'm Hafiz, I will take care of this matter. You can trust me that I will take care of it, that I will be able to set everything straight, because now he knows the dream. He knows that after 7 years there's going to be a drought. But who can he trust to deal with this matter? He doesn't trust anybody. He says, Inni Hafiz. And then he says, Alim. I'm also well aware. I have the knowledge, the foresight to know how to distribute it in such a way where everyone is justly given it. Not that I keep 80% of it for the royals, and then I distribute 20% amongst the laymen. No, I'm Alim, I'm Hafiz, and I'm Alim, and I will take care of it. And so after that, now it is said in Hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Now I say this directly after saying my statement about asking you should never ask for leadership. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, and it is narrated, that had Yusuf alayhi salam not asked for it, he would have been given it immediately. But because he asked for it, the king made him wait 1 year before he put him in that position. Wallahu a'lam. Allah knows best. Following this, there are a couple of incidents that are married now mentioned rather, that are in connection with Yusuf alayhi salam. We talked about him being in charge, and there are some narrations that talk about how the king honored him, and he gave him like the king type clothing, a really nice garment, gold, a chariot that had horses that had gold all over them. Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best. Allah doesn't mention in Qur'an. It's nothing sahih, thabit that I can say for certain. Allah knows best. It is narrated though. Another couple things that are narrated about Yusuf alayhi salam at this time is that after the king went to him, remember, they were a nation of idol worshippers. Now after Yusuf alayhi salam spoke to this king, he looked at Yusuf alayhi salam's character, he understood something. What was the character of Yusuf alayhi salam? What was his habit? He always used to invite people to Islam. Because that was the ultimate goal, right? So Yusuf alayhi salam, it is said that he invited him to Islam and he accepted Islam. This king that was there accepted Islam. Another thing that is narrated, there is a narration in which it talks about many years go by, Yusuf alayhi salam is going out, whether this was after 7 years or not, Allah knows best, but there is a narration that talks about how Yusuf alayhi salam one day, he was out. He liked to be with the people. He wasn't one of those people who liked to hide in his castle and then had other people deal with his affairs. He liked to deal with things on his own. So Yusuf alayhi salam went out at one point. It's a long narration, but at one point he was just roaming around the streets, and Zulaykha, she had gotten old. Her eyesight had gotten weak. She was frail. She was in such a great status before, but when she tried to do a crime by, trying to trap an innocent person, after that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took a lot away from her. And, she barely had anything. Her husband had passed away. She was, so her situation you can just understand. I'm just trying to describe it. So one day Yusuf alayhi salam is just roaming around the streets, and he hears someone say something, and it's to the effect of that it was something to the effect, I know it's here somewhere in my notes, but it's hard to remember it all. But, may Allah have mercy, or something to this effect. The one who took a slave and made him a king. The one, meaning she's referring to Allah, but she's praising Allah, but she's referencing Yusuf alayhi salam. That's the point. The one who took a slave and turned him into a king, and the one who took a king and due to their disobedience made them like a slave. She's referencing herself now. You understand that? So now, Yusuf alayhi salam, he overhears this statement, like who's saying that? And long story short, he speaks to her. How can I help you? She looks like an elderly woman. How can I help you? He doesn't recognize her, but she recognizes him. It is said that she said, I asked for 3 things. That you make dua for me for 3 things. Number 1, that Allah returns my eyesight. Number 2, Allah returns to me my youth. And number 3, now those 2 du'as got accepted as Yusuf alayhi salam made it. The moment he made those that's dua, and she got her eyesight back, and she could, by the way, you wonder, well, how did she know that Yusuf alayhi salam was there? She could smell his scent. Ask your wife, they can smell your scent. They know where you are, where you're not. So the 3rd thing. Now Yusuf alayhi salam sees her after she gets her youth back, and he recognizes her. Says, Buka'an shadidan. He cried profusely. He felt bad for her and her situation. And it is said that the 3rd dua she made was that, I want you to marry me. And it is said in that narration that later on, Yusuf alayhi salam did end up marrying her, and they ended up having 2 children. Allah knows best. So that story is related in narrations. There is, however, another story that is narrated that Yusuf alayhi salam married a woman by the name of Ra'il, who was the position he was given. The person was its field. And when he died, he was removed from his position. Yusuf alayhi salam took his position, And then he ended up passing away. And then Yusuf alayhi salam married his daughter, Ra'il. And it is said they had 2 children. And the people who say that he married Ra'il instead of Zulaykha, their argument is that narration is there about Yusuf alayhi salam, but he didn't end up marrying her. Rather, she stayed around him in his company, maybe in the castle or wherever he was, until she ended up passing away. And Allah knows best. For us, we don't know, but these are 2 narrations that are mentioned in regards to Yusuf alayhi salam and who he married, and he had 2 children. So we conclude with the following. And it's a lesson from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of us. Because there's not a single person, whether you're young right now, and you've never dealt with anything in your life, you don't know anything. Like my children, they don't really realize the reality that they live in. They don't know the world they live in, and how hard and difficult it can be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the story of Yusuf alayhi salam to show us something. If you trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will take care of your matters. Even if He doesn't do it right away. Sometimes He wants to test your resolve. So He'll test you, and He'll test you, because He wants to give you something really great at the end of the day. Sometimes that thing that's so great is in this dunya. And sometimes that thing is when you die and you get Jannah. So after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Yusuf alayhi salam and how the king says to him, today you have a makinun amin. And then Yusuf alayhi salam says, make me responsible for the treasures of this land. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, obviously the king said yes eventually. وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنْهَا حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ. Saying the same thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about Yusuf alayhi salam earlier. We gave Yusuf alayhi salam power, control in the land, so that he can go wherever he wanted. Being in the position he was in, he wasn't confined to a specific place. He could literally stay wherever he wanted. That was the authority that Allah had given him, the power Allah had given him. He could choose to stay wherever he wanted to stay. نُصِيبُ بِرَحْمَتِنَا مَنْ نَشَاءُ. Allah wants to make it clear. We let our rahmah afflict those, or get to those whomsoever we wish. وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. But one thing is really true. I never allow those who do good, their reward to go to waste. I never allow that. وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So you may find yourself in a situation where you keep doing good, but you feel like you're not getting anything. Then remember the promise of Allah. Allah does not waste the reward of those who do good. وَلَا أَجْرَ الْآخِرَةِ. And the reality is that the reward of akhirah خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. So Yusuf alayhi salam is a lesson for us that he was not only given that we all understand that he's a Nabi, he was righteous, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, with Allah's rahmah, He will enter all the Anbiya alayhi salam into prison without any reckoning. Allah says, but I gave him something in this dunya. So it's not that Allah says, I will make you go through hardship and I'll only give you in akhirah. But Allah is saying, I can give you in this dunya as well if I want. But know this, your ultimate goal, your ultimate desire is what? Ajrul akhirah. Ajrul akhirah. Because there's nothing in this dunya I could give you that is superior to what you're going to get in akhirah. Just reminds me of one hadith, and we'll leave it to this. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, once he said there's a hadith qudsi, in which means that this is a statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not mentioned in Qur'an. It's a hadith, called a hadith qudsi. It's a little long-winded, but the end of it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the basic gist Allah says, He says at the end, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ أَبْدِي بِي. This is the principle of Allah. Remember this principle. If you take anything away, take this principle away. Allah says, I treat my slave as they think of me. I treat my slave as they think of me. So you take Yusuf alayhi salam's story, he's being tested. There were definitely times Yusuf alayhi salam was crying. It was hard for him. It wasn't just all roses for him. We read his story and we make it think like, oh, he was chilling like he knew what was going to happen. No. Yusuf alayhi salam would cry too. Yaqub alayhi salam would cry to such a degree that he became blind. But Yusuf alayhi salam always knew that whatever is happening, there will be some khair in it for me. I just don't see it yet. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put khair in it. So his assumption with Allah was always good. So his end result was good. If you're a person who when you get afflicted with something, when everything is easy, you're happy with Allah. But when you get tested, you start to question Allah. You start to think Allah is punishing me. You start to think negative of Allah. Then Allah says what? My principle is what? If you think negative of me, then your end result will also be negative. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the strength to always have our trust in Allah, always have good thoughts about Allah. Even when things seem to go backwards, we can always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls everything. And as long as we think good of Allah, inshallah our end result will also be in khair. Ameen. Jazakallahu khair.